In the second of Peter Hitchens' report, he mentions Lord Sumption, a retired Supreme Court judge, and the interview he gave on the radio on World at One on BBC4. And this is a transcript of that interview. So, Lord Sumption speaks against hysteria-driven government coronavirus policy. And it says there who he is. And it's by far the most high-powered criticism made in public by a senior figure of considerable reputation and merit of government policy on the coronavirus. The real problem is that when human societies lose their freedom, it's not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It's usually because people willingly surrender their freedom and in return for protection against some external threat. And the threat is usually a real threat, but usually exaggerated. That is what I fear we are seeing now. The pressure on politicians has come from the public. They want action. They don't pause to ask themselves whether the action will work. They don't ask themselves whether the cost will be worth paying. They want action anyway. And anyone who has studied history will recognise here the classic symptoms of collective hysteria. Hysteria is infectious. We are working ourselves up into a lather in which we exaggerate the threat and stop asking ourselves whether the cure may be worse than the disease. The interviewer asked the question, at a time like this, as you acknowledge, citizens do look to the state for protection, for assistance. We shouldn't be surprised then that the state takes on new powers. That's what it's been asked to do, almost demanded of it. Yes, that's absolutely true. We should not be surprised. But we have to recognise that this is how societies become despotisms. And we also have to recognise this is a process which leads naturally to exaggeration. The symptoms of coronavirus are clearly serious for those with other significant medical conditions, especially if they're old. There are exceptional cases in which young people have been struck down, which have had a lot of publicity, but the numbers are pretty small. The Italian evidence, for instance, suggests that only 12% of deaths. Is it possible to say that coronavirus was the main cause of death? So yes, this is serious, and yes, it's understandable that people cry out to the government. But the real question is this serious enough to warrant putting most of our population into house imprisonment, wrecking our economy for an indefinite period, destroying businesses that honest and hard-working people have taken years to build up, saddling future generations with debt, depression, stress, heart attacks, suicides, and unbelievable distress inflicted upon millions of people who are not especially vulnerable and will suffer only mild symptoms or none at all, like the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister. The next question was, the executive, the government, is all of a sudden really rather powerful and really rather unscrutinised. Parliament is in recess. It's due to come back in late April. We're not sure whether it will or not. The Prime Minister is closeted away, communicating via his phone. There's not a lot in the way of scrutiny, is there? No, certainly there's not a lot in the way of institutional scrutiny. The press has engaged in a fair amount of scrutiny. There has been some good and challenging journalism, but mostly the press has, I think, echoed and indeed amplified the general panic. Well, that's what I've seen with my newspaper. Another question. The restrictions in movement have also changed the relationship between the police and those who in name they serve. The police are naming and shaming citizens for travel at what they see to be the wrong time or driving to the wrong place. Does that set alarm bells ringing for you as a former senior member of the judiciary? Well, I have to say it does. I mean, the traditions of policing in this country is that policemen are citizens in uniform. They're not members of a disciplined hierarchy operating just at the government's command. Yet in some parts of the country, the police have been trying to stop people from doing things like travelling to take exercise in the open country, which are not contrary to the regulations, simply because ministers have said that they would prefer us not to. The police have no power to enforce ministers' preferences, but only legal regulations, which don't go anything like as far as the government's guidance. I have to say this, the behaviour of Derbyshire police in trying to shame people into using their undoubted right to take exercise in the country and wrecking beauty spots in the fells so that people don't want to go there is frankly disgraceful. This is what a police state is like. In a state which the government can issue orders or expect preferences with no legal authority, and the police will enforce ministers' wishes. I have to say that most police forces have behaved in a thoroughly sensible and moderate fashion. Derbyshire police have shamed our policing traditions. There's a natural tendency, of course, and a strong temptation for the police to lose sight of their real functions and turn themselves from citizens in uniform into glorified school prefects. I think it's really sad that the Derbyshire police have failed to resist that. Another question. There will be people listening to this who admire your legal wisdom, but will also say, well, he's not an epidemiologist. He doesn't know how disease spreads. He doesn't understand the risks to the health service if this thing gets out of control. I mean, what do you say to them? What I say to them is that I am not a scientist, but it's the right and duty of every citizen to look and see what the scientists have said, and to analyse it for themselves, and to draw common sense conclusions. We're all perfectly capable of doing that, and there's no particular reason why the scientific nature of the problem should mean that we have to resign our liberty into the hands of scientists. We all have critical faculties, and it's rather important in a moment of national panic that we should maintain them.